She was only 8 years old when the letter arrived, telling her she'd inherited a tower nobody wanted, a crumbling stone relic that hadn't been opened in 90 years, where the stairs spiraled down into darkness and the walls whispered secrets that would change everything. Before we explore this story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning in late September, slipped through the mail slot of a small duplex on the edge of Millbrook, Connecticut. Grace Carter almost didn't see it. She was rushing through the kitchen, pulling her dark hair into a ponytail, trying to make her daughter's lunch, while simultaneously searching for matching socks and wondering how she'd stretch $23 until Friday's paycheck. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, expensive-looking, the kind that didn't belong in mailboxes like theirs. Grace's hands were still damp from rinsing the breakfast dishes when she picked it up. The return address read, Whitmore, Ashford and Associates, Estate Law, Hartford, Connecticut. Her stomach dropped. Bills she expected. Collection notices she'd grown numb to. But lawyers meant trouble. Mama. 8-year-old Lily appeared in the doorway, backpack slung over one shoulder, her blonde hair catching the morning light. She had her father's eyes, bright green and curious, though Grace tried not to think about that. He'd left when Lily was 2, and they'd been managing alone ever since. Just a second, baby, Grace said, sliding a butter knife under the envelope's seal. Her hands trembled slightly. The letter inside was typed on heavy paper, formal and direct. Grace's eyes skimmed the words once, then again, certain she'd misread. Dear Miss Carter, we are writing to inform you regarding the estate of Cecilia Margaret Ashworth, deceased as of July 14th of this year. Our records indicate that your daughter, Lily Marie Carter, is the sole living descendant and heir to Miss Ashworth's estate, specifically including the property known as Ashworth Tower, located at. Grace's vision blurred. She read it a third time. What is it? Lily asked, stepping closer. I don't understand, Grace whispered. It says you've inherited something from someone named Cecilia Ashworth. Lily wrinkled her nose. Who's that? I have no idea. The letter continued with legal jargon. Grace barely understood, but the key points were clear. Lily had inherited a property. There was no money mentioned, no other assets, just a tower. And according to the letter, the property had been sealed and abandoned since 1935. Grace's mind raced. Her family tree was simple, tragically so. Her mother had died when Grace was 16. Her father had vanished before that. She'd never known any extended family, never heard the name Ashworth in her life. Yet here was a law firm, claiming her 8-year-old daughter was an heir to some mysterious property that had been locked up for nearly 90 years. She looked at Lily, who was staring at her with wide, hopeful eyes. Does this mean we're rich? Lily asked. Grace's heart squeezed. Baby, I don't know what this means. But later that afternoon, after dropping Lily at school and calling in late to her shift at the diner, Grace sat in the cramped waiting room of Whitmore, Ashford and Associates. The office smelled like leather and old paper. The receptionist had looked at her worn jeans and faded jacket with thinly veiled judgment. Finally, a man in his 60s emerged, silver-haired and impeccably dressed. He introduced himself as Robert Whitmore. Miss Carter, thank you for coming in, he said, gesturing her into a wood-paneled office. I imagine our letter was quite a surprise. That's putting it mildly, Grace said, sitting stiffly in the leather chair across from his massive desk. I've never heard of Cecilia Ashworth. How is my daughter supposedly related to her? Whitmore opened a file and pulled out what looked like a family tree, lines and names stretching back generations. He traced a path with his finger. Cecilia Ashworth was your great-grandmother's sister. She never married, never had children. When she died at age 97 this summer, she left very specific instructions. The tower was to go to the youngest female descendant in the direct line. That would be your daughter. Grace studied the chart. She recognized none of the names except her own mother's, 3 generations down. "Why didn't anyone tell me about this family?" she asked. Whitmore's expression softened. "From what I understand, there was a falling out in the early 1930s. Cecilia's family cut ties completely. She lived alone in that tower for decades, becoming something of a recluse. When she moved to a care facility in 2018, she left instructions that the tower remain sealed until her death, at which point it would pass to her heir. And you're telling me this tower has been sitting empty since 1935. The property was maintained externally, taxes paid from a trust. But yes, the interior has been sealed since Miss Ashworth left it as a young woman. She was quite specific. No one was to enter until it passed to the heir." Grace felt dizzy. "What kind of condition is it in?" Whitmore hesitated. "I'll be honest, Miss Carter. The structure is old, possibly dangerous. The town has wanted to demolish it for years, but the trust prevented any action. Now that it belongs to your daughter, you have options. You can sell the land, though I'll warn you, the location is poor and the structure would need to be removed at significant cost. Or you can explore the property and decide what to do." "Where is it?" "About 40 minutes from here, in the hills outside Millbrook. Quite isolated." Grace sat back. They'd lived in Millbrook her entire life. She'd never heard of any tower. "Can I see?" "Eye it." Whitmore handed her a ring of old brass keys. "These are yours, or rather, your daughter's. I should warn you, Miss Carter. There have been rumors about that place for decades. Local legends. People say strange things about it." "What kind of things?" He smiled thinly. "The kind that make property value plummet. But they're just stories. Old buildings attract tall tales." Grace took the keys. They were heavy, ornate, ancient-looking. She ran her thumb over the cold metal. "What do I owe you?" she asked quietly. She had maybe $200 in her account. "Nothing. Miss Ashworth's trust covered all legal fees. The property is yours, free and clear. No liens, no mortgages. Just a very old tower that hasn't been opened in a very long time." That evening, Grace sat at their small kitchen table with Lily, the keys between them, a printed map from the lawyer's office showing the property location. "So, I really inherited something?" Lily asked, her small fingers reaching for the keys. "Apparently. What's it look like?" Grace pulled up the one photograph Whitmore had given her. It showed a stone tower rising from overgrown woods. 3 stories, tall, narrow, and cylindrical like something from a fairy tale. The stones were dark with age, the small windows like eyes. Ivy crawled up one side. The roof was conical, slate tiles missing in places. Lily's eyes went wide. "It looks like Rapunzel's tower." Grace saw something different. She saw a crumbling, dangerous structure that was probably one strong wind away from collapse. She saw a property so worthless that a wealthy woman had let it sit abandoned for 90 years rather than sell it. She saw a liability. But when she looked at Lily's face, glowing with wonder, she couldn't bring herself to say any of that. "Should we go see it?" Grace asked. Lily nodded so hard, her whole body moved. "Can we go now? It's getting dark. How about Saturday?" The next few days crawled by. Lily talked about nothing but the tower. At school, she told anyone who would listen that she'd inherited a castle. Grace heard about it from Lily's teacher, Mrs. Patterson, who pulled her aside at pickup with a concerned smile. "Lily's been telling some very creative stories," Mrs. Patterson said carefully, "about inheriting property." Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks. It's actually true. She inherited an old tower from a distant relative. Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows rose. "Oh, well, that's quite something." But Grace saw the doubt in her eyes. And by Friday evening, when she stopped at Miller's Market for groceries, she understood why. Janet Miller, who'd graduated 2 years ahead of Grace and never let her forget it, was at the register. Heard Lily's going around, saying she's a princess now, Janet said loudly enough for the whole store to hear. Inherited a castle or something. Grace handed her the money for milk and bread. It's a tower, actually. Sure it is, honey. Janet's smile was sharp. My kid said. She drew pictures of it in class. Sounds like quite the imagination. Grace didn't respond. She took her change and left, but she could feel eyes following her, hear the whispers starting. By the time she got home, her phone had 3 texts from old classmates she hadn't heard from in years, all asking if it was true, if Lily really inherited something, if Grace was suddenly rich. She didn't answer any of them. Saturday morning arrived cold and grey, autumn pressing in. Grace packed a backpack with flashlights, bottled water, a first aid kit, and her phone fully charged. She dressed Lily in sturdy jeans and sneakers, ignoring her daughter's protests about wanting to wear her princess dress. If we're exploring an old building, we need to be safe, Grace said firmly. The drive took them out of Millbrook's small downtown, past the diner where Grace worked, past the elementary school and the Methodist church. The road narrowed, trees pressing close on both sides, leaves turning gold, red. They followed the map deeper into the hills, where houses grew sparse and the woods grew thick. Finally, Grace turned onto a barely visible dirt road, branches scraping the car's sides. The road climbed, twisted, then opened into a small clearing, and there it was. The tower rose from the earth like something from another world, out of place and out of time. The photographs hadn't done it justice. Up close, the structure was both more beautiful and more terrifying than Grace had imagined. The stones were dark grey, fitted together with precision that spoke of true craftsmanship. The tower was narrow, perhaps 20 feet in diameter, but it stretched up a full 3 stories, topped with that conical roof of slate tiles. Windows broke the stone at intervals, narrow slits on the lower levels, slightly larger on the upper floor. All were dark, empty. Ivy had claimed much of the eastern wall, thick green vines that had grown for decades. The wooden door, at the base, was weathered to silver, banded with iron that had rusted to deep brown. Grace and Lily sat in the car for a long moment, just staring. "It's real," Lily whispered. "Yeah," Grace said. "It's real." They climbed out. The clearing was overgrown with tall grass and weeds. Small wildflowers pushed through, purple and white. The air smelled like damp earth and decay. No other buildings were visible, no signs of civilization except the faint dirt road they'd come in on. Grace approached slowly, Lily clutching her hand. Up close, she could see cracks in some of the stones, places where mortar had crumbled. But the overall structure looked surprisingly solid. These walls had stood for over a century. They seemed determined to stand for another. She pulled out the key ring Whitmore had given her. 3 keys, all different sizes. She tried the largest in the heavy iron lock. It turned smoothly, as if it had been oiled yesterday instead of sitting unused for 90 years. The lock clicked. Grace pushed. The door swung open on hinges that barely creaked, revealing darkness. "Stay close to me," Grace said. They stepped inside. The air hit them first, stale and cold, but not musty, not rotten. Grace had expected the smell of decay, of mold and collapsed ceilings. Instead, it smelled old, preserved, like a museum that had been closed for decades but maintained perfectly until the day it shut. She pulled out her flashlight. The beam cut through darkness, revealing a circular room with stone walls and a floor of wide wooden planks. The wood was dark with age, but solid under their feet. Against the walls stood covered shapes, furniture hidden beneath white sheets yellowed with time. Grace played her light around the space. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, the mantel carved with intricate designs. To their right, a wooden staircase curved up, following the tower's wall to the upper floors, and to their left Grace's light stopped. A doorway, but it led down. "Mama, look," Lily pulled her toward. one of the covered shapes. Together they lifted a corner of the sheet. Beneath was a chair, beautiful and perfectly preserved, upholstered in deep blue velvet that hadn't faded. Beside it, a small table held a book, still waiting where someone had left it nearly a century ago. Grace opened the book carefully. The pages were brittle, but intact. It was a novel, published in 1932. Someone was reading this, Grace murmured, and then they just left. Lily had already moved to the next covered shape. Mama, help me. Together they pulled back another sheet. Beneath was a writing desk, its surface still neat, a pen lying beside a leather journal. Grace opened the journal with trembling hands. The first page had a name written in elegant script: Cecilia Ashworth, January 1935. This was hers, Grace whispered. The woman who left this to you. Lily pressed close, trying to see. Grace flipped through the pages. Most were blank, but the first few pages held journal entries, in that same careful handwriting. January 1st, 1935. Father says I must marry Thomas Blackwell by summer, or be cut off entirely. I have decided I would rather live in poverty and freedom than in wealth and chains. This tower will be my refuge. They think I'll come crawling back. They don't know me at all. Grace's throat tightened. She flipped ahead. January 18th, 1935. I've been here nearly 3 weeks. No one has come. I think they're waiting for me to fail, to break, to beg, but I won't. I have everything I need here. The stairs go deeper than anyone knows. What's below is enough to last a lifetime. They'll never understand why I chose this. What does it say? Lily asked. She lived here alone, Grace said quietly. By choice. They explored more. Every piece of furniture was covered but preserved. A small kitchen area had been set up in one corner, though any food was long gone. Dishes sat in a cabinet. China so fine Grace was afraid to touch it. Crystal glasses lined another shelf, catching the flashlight beam and throwing rainbow patterns across the stone walls. Grace picked up one glass and turned it over. The bottom was etched with a maker's mark, delicate script that read, Paris, 1928. These are expensive, Grace whispered to herself. She carefully replaced the glass. In a corner cabinet, Lily discovered a music box. She wound the key gently, and after 90 years of silence, it played. The tinkling melody was slightly off-key but hauntingly beautiful, filling the circular room with sound. Grace felt tears prick her eyes. Someone had loved these things, had chosen each piece carefully, had built a life here in defiance of everyone who said she couldn't. Near the fireplace, Grace found a stack of letters tied with faded ribbon. She untied them carefully and read the top envelope. It was addressed to Cecilia Ashworth, but had never been opened. The return address showed it was from her father, dated March 1935. Grace held it up to the light but didn't open it. Whatever words it contained, Cecilia had chosen not to read them. That decision felt sacred somehow. Upstairs, they found 2 more levels, a bedroom on the 2nd floor with a 4-poster bed and wardrobe full of dresses from the 1930s, and an observatory on the 3rd floor, windows looking out over the forest canopy. The bedroom was perhaps the most personal space. The bed was made with military precision. A quilt folded at the foot. On the nightstand sat a photograph in a silver frame. Grace picked it up and wiped away the dust. It showed a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, with dark hair and eyes that held both sadness and determination. She wore a simple dress and stood in front of this very tower, one hand resting on the stone wall like she was claiming it. "Is that her?" Lily asked. "Miss Cecilia?" "I think so," Grace said. The resemblance to her own mother was striking. The same shape of the eyes, the same set of the jaw. This was family, her family, that she'd never known existed. In the wardrobe, the dresses hung in a neat row, each one carefully preserved. Grace ran her fingers over the fabrics, silk and wool and cotton, all from another era. At the back of the wardrobe, she found something unexpected: a man's coat. It was well made, expensive, but it had clearly been hidden behind the dresses on purpose. Grace checked the pockets and found a folded note. "See, I'll wait as long as it takes. When you're ready to come back to the world, I'll be here. But if you're never ready, I understand. You were always braver than all of us. Thomas." Grace refolded the note and replaced it. So Thomas Blackwell, the man Cecilia was supposed to marry, had tried to reach her, had left his coat as a promise or a plea. But Cecilia had stayed in her tower, alone but free. The observatory on the 3rd floor was circular, with windows on all sides offering views of the endless forest. A telescope stood in the center, still pointed at the sky. Star charts lined one wall, and a bookshelf held volumes on astronomy, all carefully annotated in Cecilia's handwriting. This was where she'd spent her evenings, Grace realized, alone with the stars, with the vast universe, far from the small expectations of her family and society. But it was the downward staircase that kept drawing Grace's attention. They returned to the ground floor. Grace shone her flashlight into the doorway that led down. Stone steps spiraled clockwise, disappearing into darkness. "Should we go down?" Lily asked, her voice small but eager. Grace hesitated. Every instinct screamed no, but Whitmore's words echoed. "The property is yours. Free and clear. Just a little way," Grace said. "Stay right behind me." The stairs were narrow, barely wide enough for an adult. Grace descended slowly, one hand on the cold stone wall, flashlight beam bouncing ahead. The air grew colder with each step. Behind her, Lily's small hand gripped the back of her jacket. 10 steps down, the stairs opened into a small landing. Another doorway led to a room carved from stone. Grace swept her light across it. More furniture, but different. Newer, or at least from a different era. A desk, file cabinets, shelves lined with boxes. "What is this place?" Lily whispered. Grace didn't answer. She was staring at the far wall, where her flashlight had caught something that made her breath stop. Another staircase, leading even deeper. She crossed the room, drawn forward against her better judgment. The second staircase was different from the first. The stones newer, the construction more deliberate. These steps had been built not as part of the original tower, but added later, carved directly into the bedrock beneath. Grace shone her light down. The stairs spiraled down, 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 far deeper than should be possible. 20 feet? 30? She couldn't tell where they ended. "How far does it go?" Lily asked, her voice full of wonder, instead of fear. Grace shook her head. "I don't know. But we're not going down there today. We need proper equipment, maybe even professional help." "But Mama..." "No, Lily. This is serious. We don't know what's down there, or if it's safe." Lily pouted, but didn't argue. Grace was grateful. The truth was, she felt a pull toward those descending stairs, a curiosity that bordered on compulsion. What had Cecilia Ashworth hidden down there? What had she meant by the stairs go deeper than anyone knows, and what's below is enough to last a lifetime? They spent another hour exploring the upper levels, finding more journals, more glimpses into Cecilia's isolated life. She'd been 23 when she'd moved into the tower, the daughter of a wealthy family who'd tried to force her into marriage. She'd refused and been disowned. These journals showed a woman alone, but not lonely, determined but not bitter. She'd lived here for decades, though the entries stopped in the early 1940s. After that, only blank pages. As the afternoon light began to fade, Grace reluctantly led Lily back to the car. They stood outside for a moment, looking back at the tower. It seemed different now, less forbidding, more mysterious, like it was waiting for them to return. "Can we come back tomorrow?" Lily asked. Grace wanted to say no. She wanted to lock that door and never think about the tower again. But when she looked at her daughter's face, bright with excitement and hope, She found herself nodding. Yeah, baby, we can come back. The drive home felt different. Grace's mind spun with possibilities and questions. The property was Lily's, legally and free. But what did they do with it? The structure seemed sound, but it would need inspection, restoration, and those stairs leading down into darkness. What was Cecilia hiding? Lily chattered in the passenger seat, already planning their next visit, talking about bringing her art supplies to draw the tower, about maybe cleaning it up and making it beautiful again. Grace listened with half an ear, her thoughts tumbling over themselves. "Mama," Lily said suddenly, her voice quieter, "do you think Miss Cecilia was lonely?" Grace glanced at her daughter. "Why do you ask? All those beautiful things, and nobody to share them with. It seems sad." Grace's chest tightened. "Sometimes being alone is better than being with people who don't understand you." "Is that why it's just us?" Lily asked. "Because people don't understand us?" Grace reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. "No, baby. It's just us because we're enough. We're more than enough." But even as she said it, Grace wondered if she believed it. They'd been alone for so long, she and Lily, against the world. Maybe Cecilia had felt the same way. Maybe that's why the tower had passed to them, because they understood what it meant to choose solitude over compromise, poverty over chains. Back at their duplex, Lily chattered non-stop about the tower, while Grace made grilled cheese for dinner. She half-listened, her thoughts elsewhere. Her phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello? Miss Carter?" A man's voice. Unfamiliar. "My name is Marcus Webb. I'm a local historian, and I heard you're the new owner of Ashworth Tower." Grace frowned. "How did you hear that?" "Small town. Word travels. Listen, I've been researching that property for 20 years. There's something you should know about its history." "What kind of something?" A pause. "Not over the phone. Can we meet?" Every instinct told Grace to hang up, but curiosity won. "There's a coffee shop on Main Street. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. I'll be there. Miss Carter, be careful at that tower. There's a reason it stayed sealed for so long." He hung up before she could respond. That night, Grace lay awake, long after Lily had fallen asleep. Moonlight streamed through their bedroom window. She could hear her daughter's soft breathing from the twin bed across the room. What had they stumbled into? Grace had lived her whole life in Millbrook, working dead-end jobs, scraping by, invisible. Now, suddenly, she owned property, had mysterious historians calling her, had lawyers and keys and secrets. She thought about Cecilia Ashworth, 23 years old, alone in that tower by choice. A woman who'd refused the life her family demanded and paid the price. Grace understood that kind of desperation, that need for something different, something more. But what had Cecilia been hiding in those depths? Grace rolled over and looked at Lily, peaceful in sleep. Whatever was in that tower, it belonged to her daughter now. And Grace would protect her, no matter what secrets those spiral stairs held. She got up quietly and walked to the window. Outside, the street was empty, houses dark. But somewhere out there, miles away in the forest, the tower stood. Grace pressed her palm against the cool glass and closed her eyes. In her mind, she saw those stairs spiraling down, deeper and deeper. She saw Cecilia's careful handwriting. The stairs go deeper than anyone knows. What's below is enough to last a lifetime. Enough what? Money? Secrets? Something else entirely? Grace opened her eyes and looked at her reflection in the window. She looked tired, worn down by years of struggle. But behind the exhaustion, she saw something else. Curiosity, hope, maybe even excitement. Outside, wind moved through the trees. Miles away, in the darkness of the forest, the tower stood silent, waiting. Its stones held secrets that had waited 90 years to be found. And deep below, downstairs that spiraled far deeper than anyone knew, something waited in the dark. Something Cecilia had left behind. something worth hiding for a lifetime. The key ring sat on Grace's nightstand, brass gleaming in the moonlight. 3 keys for 3 locks. But Grace suspected there were more than 3 secrets waiting in Ashworth Tower. She climbed back into bed and pulled the thin blanket up to her chin. Tomorrow she'd meet the historian. Tomorrow she'd learn what Millbrook whispered about the tower. Tomorrow she'd begin to understand what Lily had truly inherited. But tonight, in the darkness, all Grace could think about was those stairs spiraling down into the earth, deeper and deeper, as if the tower wasn't built up from the ground at all, as if it had been built down into something ancient, into something that had been waiting long before Cecilia Ashworth ever turned that first key. Grace's last thought before sleep finally claimed her was of Cecilia, young and defiant, descending those stairs alone for the first time. What had she felt? Fear? Excitement? Or had she known, somehow, that what waited below would change everything? The clock on the nightstand read 2:17 in the morning. In 6 hours, Grace would meet Marcus Webb. In 6 hours, she'd learn more about the tower's history. But right now, in the quiet darkness of their small duplex, mother and daughter slept, unaware that tomorrow would set them on a path they couldn't turn back from. In the forest, the tower waited. The stairs descended, and far below, in chambers carved from living rock, secrets that had slept for 90 years began, very slowly, to wake. Sunday morning arrived with mist hanging low over Millbrook's empty streets. Grace sat in the corner booth of Annie's coffee house at 8:55, watching the door. She'd left Lily with their neighbor, Mrs. Chen, telling her daughter it was just a boring adult meeting. The lie sat heavy in her stomach. At exactly 9 o'clock, a man walked in. He was perhaps 50, with graying hair pulled into a ponytail and wire-rimmed glasses that caught the light. He wore a worn leather jacket and carried a weathered messenger bag that looked like it had seen 1,000 research trips. "Miss Carter?" he asked, approaching her booth. Grace nodded. "Marcus Webb?" He slid into the seat across from her and immediately pulled out a thick folder from his bag. "Thank you for meeting me. I know this must seem strange. Everything about the last week has been strange," Grace said. Marcus ordered coffee from Annie, then spread several old photographs across the table. Grace leaned forward. They all showed the tower, but in different eras. One from what looked like the early 1900s showed it pristine, surrounded by manicured grounds. Another from the 30s showed it more isolated, the forest creeping closer. "The Ashworth family built that tower in 1887, Marcus began. "It was originally a folly, a fancy project by Richard Ashworth, who'd made a fortune in textiles. But it became something else." "What do you mean?" Marcus pulled out a newspaper clipping, yellowed and fragile. The headline read, "Ashworth Family Vanishes. Mansion Abandoned. 1924. Grace's breath caught. What happened? That's the thing. Nobody knows. Richard Ashworth, his wife Eleanor, and their adult son Christopher disappeared in October of 1924. They left behind their mansion, their fortune, everything. The only one who remained was their daughter, Cecilia. She was just 14. 14. Grace's stomach twisted. She was a child who refused to leave the tower. The courts tried to remove her, place her with relatives. She fought them for years. By the time she turned 21, she had legal control of the property. That's when she sealed it and disappeared from public life entirely. Grace thought of the journals, Cecilia's defiant words about choosing freedom over chains. "Do you know what happened to her family?" Marcus shook his head. There were theories. Some said they fled to Europe to escape scandal. Others claimed they were murdered, though no bodies were ever found. The mansion itself burned down in 1932. Only the tower remained. "What scandal?" Grace asked. Marcus leaned closer, lowering his voice. "This is where it gets interesting. Richard Ashworth made his money in textiles, but by the 1920s, that business was declining. However, the family suddenly became wealthier than ever, much wealthier. During Prohibition, understanding dawned on Grace. They were bootleggers. Or worse, there were rumors that the tower was used to store more than just illegal alcohol. Stolen goods, smuggled art, things that went missing from wealthy families up and down the East Coast. The tower's location was perfect, isolated, accessible by old lumber roads that no longer appear on any maps. Grace stared at the photographs. And you think whatever they were hiding is still down there. I think Cecilia knew exactly what her family had done and where they'd hidden everything. I think that's why she stayed. Not to protect the fortune, but to keep it buried. Annie brought Marcus's coffee. They both waited until she'd left before continuing. Miss Carter, I need to be honest with you. I'm not the only person interested in that tower. There are collectors, private investigators, even some unsavory types who've been watching that property for decades. The trust kept them away, but now that it's passed to your daughter, he trailed off meaningfully. You're saying we're in danger. I'm saying, be careful. And if you do explore those stairs, document everything. Because whatever's down there, it's been hidden for 100 years for a reason. Grace drove home in silence, Marcus's folder heavy on the passenger seat. He'd given her copies of everything. Newspaper clippings, old police reports, even a partial map of the tower's rumored underground chambers, drawn by someone in the 1950s. When she got home, Lily was waiting at the door, practically vibrating with excitement. Can we go back to the tower? Please, Mama, please. Grace looked at her daughter's eager face and thought about danger, about secrets, about things buried for good reason. Every responsible bone in her body said no. Get your jacket, Grace said. They arrived at the tower an hour later, the afternoon sun filtering through autumn leaves. This time, Grace came prepared. She'd borrowed a better flashlight from their neighbor, packed rope and a first aid kit, and charged her phone to full battery. Inside, the tower felt different, familiar now, almost welcoming. Lily ran immediately to the downward stairs. Can we go down now? All the way. Grace hesitated, then nodded. Stay close to me. If I say we stop, we stop. Understood? Understood. They descended the first set of stairs to the landing they'd discovered yesterday. Grace shone her light around the stone room, more carefully this time. The file cabinets caught her attention. She approached them and tried the first drawer. Locked. She tried the key ring, and the smallest key fit perfectly. Inside were files, dozens of them, organized with meticulous care. Grace pulled out the first one. It was labeled Acquisitions, 1920 to 1923. She opened it carefully. Inside were receipts, bills of sale, and photographs of art pieces, jewelry, sculptures. Each had a price listed and a date. But as Grace read more carefully, something became clear. These weren't legitimate purchases. The prices were too low. The sellers had names that appeared multiple times, with different addresses. These are stolen, Grace whispered. What? Lily asked. Nothing, baby. Just old papers. But her hands trembled as she replaced the file. Marcus had been right. The Ashworth family hadn't just been bootleggers. They'd been running a sophisticated theft and smuggling operation. She moved to the second staircase, the one that descended into bedrock. The pull was stronger now, that inexplicable compulsion to know what lay below. Ready? She asked Lily. Her daughter nodded, eyes wide with excitement rather than fear. Grace envied that fearlessness. They started down. The spiral was tight, the walls pressing close. Grace counted. Steps. 20, 30, 40. The air grew colder, damper. The stone here was different, older, not shaped by human hands, but carved through existing rock. At 50 steps, the staircase opened into another chamber. Grace's flashlight swept across a room 3 times the size of the one above. And this one wasn't empty. Wooden crates lined the walls, stacked floor to ceiling. Each was marked with dates and codes. Grace approached the nearest one and tried to pry it open. The wood was old, but solid. She used her car key to work at the lid until it finally gave way with a crack. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were bottles. She pulled one out carefully. The label read Chateau Margaux, 1900. Wine? Lily said. Very old, very expensive wine, Grace murmured. She checked another crate. More bottles, different labels, all from the turn of the century. But the wine wasn't what made her breath catch. It was what she found in the next crate. Wrapped in silk cloth were paintings. She lifted one carefully. It was small, perhaps 12 inches by 16, showing a pastoral scene. The style was old master, the brushwork exquisite. In the corner was a signature she didn't recognize, but that looked important. Grace set it down with shaking hands. If these were real, if these were stolen, she couldn't even calculate the value. Mama, look! Lily had found something else. She was pulling back a canvas tarp in the corner, revealing a different kind of cargo. Steamer trunks, half a dozen of them, leather and brass, the kind wealthy people took on ocean voyages. Grace knelt beside the first trunk and opened it. Inside were clothes from the 1920s, beaded dresses, fur stoles, men's suits. Beneath the clothes, wrapped in tissue paper, were jewelry boxes. She opened the first box. A diamond necklace caught her flashlight beam and threw stars across the stone walls. "It's so pretty," Lily breathed. Grace's hands trembled. This wasn't just stolen goods. This was evidence of crimes that had never been solved. Missing items from wealthy families who'd blamed servants, insurance frauds, unsolved robberies. All of it hidden here, 90 feet underground, for 100 years. She started to close the trunk when she noticed something else. A leather journal, tucked into a side pocket. Grace pulled it out and opened to the first page. The handwriting was masculine, angular, dated June 1923. "We've built something remarkable here, something that will secure our family's future for generations. The tunnel system reaches half a mile in every direction. The main vault can hold treasures beyond imagination. And no one, not the police, not the government, no one knows it exists." Grace flipped ahead, her pulse racing. October 1924. They're getting too close. The federal agents, the investigators. Someone talked. "Christopher wants to run, but I refuse to abandon everything we've built. Eleanor agrees with me. We've decided to use the escape route. By the time anyone reads this, we'll be gone. But the collection remains. Cecilia knows where everything is. She's the only one we can trust." The entries stopped there. Grace sat back on her heels, processing. Richard Ashworth had written this. He'd planned their disappearance, left everything hidden, and trusted his 14-year-old daughter to guard it. "Mama?" Lily's voice was small. "There's another staircase." Grace looked up. Sure enough, at the far end of the chamber, another opening descended even deeper. "How far down does this go?" Grace whispered. She stood and crossed to the opening. Her flashlight showed stairs descending at a steeper angle. Wooden support beams had been installed here, reinforcing the tunnel. This wasn't just carving through rock anymore. This was engineering, deliberate construction of something meant to last. "We should go back," Grace said, but even as she spoke, she was taking the first step down. Lily followed without hesitation. This staircase was different, rougher, more utilitarian. Every 20 steps, a small alcove had been carved into the wall with oil lamps that had long since burned out. Someone had traversed these stairs regularly, carrying enough that they needed rest stops. At the bottom, perhaps 30 feet below the previous chamber, they emerged into what could only be called a tunnel. It stretched ahead into darkness, the ceiling reinforced with timber beams, the floor leveled and smooth. Grace's flashlight couldn't reach the end. The tunnel seemed to go on forever. "This is incredible," she breathed. They built an entire underground system. They walked forward, slowly. Every 50 feet or so, doorways opened into side chambers. Grace peered into the first one. It was stacked with more crates, more trunks, more evidence of systematic theft spanning years. The second chamber held something different. Furniture. Not just any furniture, but pieces that belonged in museums. A Louis XIV chair. What looked like a medieval chest. A writing desk with mother-of-pearl inlay that gleamed even under years of dust. "It's like a treasure cave," Lily said, her voice echoing. "It's a crime scene," Grace corrected quietly. But she couldn't deny the strange beauty of it all. Someone had curated this collection with care, arranging each piece, documenting everything. They continued down the tunnel. Grace checked her phone. No signal, unsurprisingly. They'd been underground for nearly an hour. The fourth chamber was different from the others. Instead of storage, it had been set up as living quarters. A bed, long stripped of linens, but still intact. A desk with papers scattered across it. Bookshelves lined with volumes. Grace approached the desk. The papers were journal entries, but different from Richard's. These were in Cecilia's handwriting, the same script Grace had seen in the tower above. November 1924. They're gone. Father left the journal explaining everything, but I already knew. I've known for years what they were doing. I helped catalog half of these pieces myself. And now I'm alone, with their legacy, with their crimes. Grace flipped ahead, her throat tight. January 1925. The police came again today. They searched the tower top to bottom, but found nothing. They'll never think to look down. Father designed the entrance to the stairs so perfectly. Even when you know it's there, you can barely see it. I told them I knew nothing about my family's disappearance. They don't believe me, but they can't prove otherwise. More entries, years passing. July 1935. I'm 25 now. Old enough that people have stopped trying to save me. I've decided to seal the tower completely and live here permanently. Let them think I'm eccentric. Better that than let them discover what's below. March 1941. War in Europe. Some of the pieces hidden here are probably worth fortunes now. Art smuggled out before the Nazis could seize it. I wonder if the original owners are even alive. I wonder if I'm protecting their property or just hoarding stolen treasure. The line blurs more every year. What happens next will pull them deeper into danger, reveal a truth buried for a century, and force a choice between fortune and doing what's right. If you're hooked on this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. The final entry was dated April 1958. I'm nearly 50 years old. I've spent my entire adult life guarding my family's secrets, their crimes, their greed. But I'm tired, so tired. I've decided that when I die, everything will pass to the next generation. Maybe they'll have the courage to do what I couldn't. Maybe they'll bring all of this into the light. Or maybe they'll just seal it all away again and let the past stay buried. Either way, it won't be my burden anymore. Grace set down the journal with shaking hands. Cecilia had lived her entire life as a guardian of stolen treasure, unable to turn it in without implicating her vanished family, unable to use it without revealing its existence. She'd been trapped by her parents' crimes, by loyalty and fear, and the weight of secrets. "Mama, you need to see this." Lily's voice came from deeper in the chamber. Grace turned to find her daughter standing in front of what looked like a solid wall. But as Grace approached, she saw the seam, the hidden door built into the rock face. "How did you find this?" Grace asked. "I felt cold air," Lily said, like it was breathing. Grace ran her hand along the seam. There was indeed a faint current of air, colder and drier than the tunnel. She pushed, but the door didn't budge. Then she noticed the lock. Small, brass, old. She pulled out the key ring, the second key, the one she hadn't used yet, slid into the lock perfectly. It turned with a click that echoed through the chamber. The door swung open on counterweights, revealing another tunnel beyond. But this one was different. The walls here weren't carved from rough stone. They were smooth, finished, almost polished. Electric lights were mounted at intervals, though the bulbs had long since burned out. Grace and Lily exchanged a look, then stepped through. The tunnel curved gently to the right. After perhaps 100 feet, it opened into a chamber that stole Grace's breath. It was a vault. A real, honest-to-God vault, 30 feet across and 20 feet high. The walls were reinforced concrete, the ceiling arched like a cathedral, and every inch of available space was filled with treasures. Display cases lined the walls, each containing jewelry, coins, small sculptures. Paintings hung on special mounts, dozens of them, from various eras and styles. In the center of the room, larger pieces were arranged: statues, vases, ornamental swords, even what looked like a medieval altar piece. Grace stood frozen in the doorway. This was beyond anything she'd imagined. This wasn't just stolen goods hidden in crates. This was a private museum, a collection assembled with care and expertise. She walked forward slowly, her flashlight sweeping across priceless artifact after priceless artifact. A Roman bust, Renaissance paintings, Art Deco jewelry, Ming Dynasty vases, Egyptian artifacts that probably belonged in the Cairo Museum. "Mama," Lily whispered, "are we rich now?" Grace couldn't answer. She was staring at a painting illuminated by her flashlight. It was large, perhaps 4 feet by 5 feet, showing a woman in blue holding a child. The style was unmistakable even to someone with no art training. It looked like a Raphael, or if not Raphael, someone from that era, that caliber. If this was real, if even one of these pieces was authentic, they weren't just rich. They were looking at hundreds of millions of dollars. Grace's legs felt weak. She sat down hard on the stone floor. "This can't be real," she said. "This can't be happening." But it was. All around her, treasures that museums would kill for sat in the darkness, untouched for decades. Some of these pieces were probably considered lost to history. Others were likely listed in databases of stolen art, their theft still unsolved after 70 or 80 years. Lily was exploring the display cases, her small face pressed against the glass. "Look, Mama. Crowns. Like real princess crowns." Grace forced herself to stand. She needed to think clearly. This discovery changed everything. This wasn't just an interesting historical find. This was evidence of massive criminal activity. This was property that belonged to other people, other families, museums, governments. But it was also, legally, Lily's. She'd inherited the tower and everything in it. Did that include the contents of this vault? Or was stolen property always stolen, no matter how much time passed? Grace didn't know. She needed a lawyer. She needed the police. She needed help. But first, she needed to understand exactly what they'd found. She spent the next hour documenting everything with her phone camera. Photos of the room, close-ups of individual pieces, shots of any identifying marks or labels. Her phone's battery was dropping fast, but she kept shooting. In one corner, she found another journal. This one was Cecilia's too, but much older, from the 1920s. "Father asked me to catalogue the new acquisitions. I'm only 16, but I have a good eye for art," he says. Today's pieces: 1. Monet water, lilies, signed. 3. Fabergé eggs, likely from the Imperial collection, and a necklace that supposedly belonged to Marie Antoinette. I asked Father where he gets these things. He smiled and said, "It's better if I don't know, but I do know. I've always known." Grace closed the journal. Cecilia had been complicit from a young age, trained to recognize and catalogue stolen treasures by the family who'd stolen them. No wonder she'd spent her life guarding this place. The guilt alone would have been crushing. "Mama, I found something else," Lily called. Grace turned to find her daughter kneeling beside a small safe built into the wall. It was open, the door hanging loose. Inside were documents. Grace pulled them out carefully. Deeds, titles, bank statements, all from the 1920s. But one document caught her attention. It was a list, handwritten, titled Final Inventory, October 1924. Grace scanned the list. It was comprehensive, detailing every piece in the collection with estimated values. At the bottom, a total had been calculated. The number made Grace's vision blur. In 1924 dollars, the collection had been valued at $8 million. She did the math quickly in her head, adjusted for inflation, accounting for the increased value of rare art and antiquities. She was looking at easily $200 million. Maybe more, maybe much more. "We need to go," Grace said suddenly. "Right now." "But now, Lily." Something about the vault felt wrong suddenly. Too perfect, too preserved. Like it was waiting for something. They hurried back through the tunnel, through the chambers, up the stairs. Grace's heart pounded the entire way. When they finally emerged into the tower's ground floor, daylight filtering through the windows, she felt like she could breathe again. She locked the tower door behind them and stood in the clearing, trying to process what they'd just discovered. "Are we going to keep it?" Lily asked. "The treasure?" Grace knelt down to her daughter's level. "Baby, that treasure doesn't belong to us. It was stolen from people a long time ago. But Miss Cecilia left it to me. She left you the tower, the things inside. That's more complicated." Lily's face fell. "So, we're not rich?" Grace pulled her daughter close. "We're rich in different ways. We found something important, something historical, and now we get to decide what to do about it." But as they drove home, Grace's mind raced. Who would believe them? The story sounded insane. 8-year-old inherits tower, discovers massive collection of stolen art and antiquities worth hundreds of millions of dollars. It sounded like a fantasy, yet it was real. She had the photos, she had the journals, she had the keys. And somewhere out there, Marcus Webb had said, were people who'd been watching the tower for decades, waiting for exactly this. Grace checked her rearview mirror 3 times on the way home. Every car that stayed behind them for more than a few minutes made her nervous. When they finally pulled up to their duplex, she sat in the car for a long moment, scanning the street. Nothing looked out of place, but nothing felt safe anymore either. Inside, Lily went to do her homework, while Grace spread Marcus's research materials across the kitchen table. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through the photos she'd taken in the vault. The painting she'd thought might be a Raphael looked even more impressive on her phone screen. She zoomed in on the signature. It was definitely from that era. If authentic, it alone could be worth $20 million or more. Grace's hands shook. This was too big, too dangerous, too everything. Her phone rang, making her jump. Unknown number. "Hello? Miss Carter." A woman's voice, professional, crisp. "My name is Victoria Ashford. I'm a partner at the law firm handling the Ashworth estate. I understand you visited the tower today." Grace's blood ran cold. "How do you know that?" "The property has certain security measures. Nothing invasive, I assure you. But we like to know when the premises are accessed. I'm calling because I'd like to discuss something with you. Something regarding what you may have found." "I don't know what you're talking about. Miss Carter, please. We both know what's in that tower. The firm has known for decades. We'd like to help you navigate the legal complexities of your discovery. May I come by tomorrow to discuss this?" Grace wanted to say no. She wanted to hang up. But something in Victoria's tone suggested that refusing wasn't really an option. "Fine. Tomorrow evening, 6 o'clock. Excellent. And, Miss Carter, don't contact the police yet. Trust me, it will only complicate things." The line went dead. Grace sat staring at her phone. The law firm knew. They'd known all along what was in the tower. They'd let Lily inherit it anyway. Why? She looked at the photos again, at the treasures worth a fortune, at the evidence of crimes a century old, and she realized with cold certainty that whatever was coming next, it would change their lives forever. For better or worse, they were in this now, deep in it, and there was no going back. Victoria Ashford arrived at exactly 6 o'clock the next evening, stepping out of a black Mercedes that looked like it cost more than Grace's duplex. She wore a tailored grey suit and carried a leather briefcase that screamed old money. Her hair was pulled into a severe bun, and her heels clicked against the cracked sidewalk like gunshots. Grace opened the door before Victoria could knock. She'd sent Lily to stay with Mrs. Chen next door, claiming she had a work meeting. The lie was getting easier to tell. "Miss Carter," Victoria said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "Thank you for seeing me." Grace let her in, but didn't offer coffee or pleasantries. "You said you knew what was in the tower. Explain." Victoria settled onto the worn couch without invitation, setting her briefcase on the coffee table. "The law firm has represented the Ashworth family since 1895. We're not just estate attorneys, we're custodians of family secrets. And the biggest secret was what Richard Ashworth built beneath that tower." "Built? You mean stole?" Victoria's expression didn't change. Legally speaking, the distinction becomes murky after a century. But yes, the collection was acquired through questionable means. "Questionable?" Grace's voice rose. "It's stolen art, stolen jewels, stolen everything. People's property taken from them and hidden, underground. Property that has been abandoned for 90 years. Property that, in many cases, the original owners are long dead. Their heirs may not even know these items existed. And legally, as the heir to the Ashworth estate, your daughter has a legitimate claim to everything on that property." Grace shook her head. "That's insane. Stolen is stolen." Victoria opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick document. "I anticipated you'd feel this way. So, let me be clear about what you're facing. If you report this discovery to the police, they'll seize everything immediately. The property will be tied up in legal battles for decades. Museums will claim pieces. Foreign governments will get involved. Insurance companies who paid out claims in the 1920s will demand reimbursement. And at the end of it all, after millions in legal fees, you'll be left with nothing. Meanwhile, you and your daughter will be under constant scrutiny, possibly in danger from parties who'd prefer the collection remain hidden." "What parties?" Victoria smiled thinly. "The Ashworth family didn't operate in a vacuum. They had partners, associates, people who helped facilitate their operation. Some of those people's descendants are very much alive and very invested in making sure certain details never come to light." Grace's stomach turned. "Are you threatening me? I'm educating you. The world you've stumbled into is far more complicated than you realize. That collection isn't just valuable. It's evidence of crimes that powerful families have spent a century covering up. If you expose it, you expose them, and they won't go quietly. So, what do you suggest?" Victoria leaned forward. "The firm has a proposal. We help you authenticate and catalog everything in the vault. We work with our international contacts to discreetly return items that can be traced to specific thefts. Everything that can't be directly attributed to victims goes through proper legal channels to establish your daughter's ownership. We take a percentage as legal fees. You retain a significant portion of the collection's value, and everyone walks away satisfied. Everyone except the people who were robbed. The people who were robbed are dead, Miss Carter. Their children are dead. We're talking about crimes from 1920 to 1935, over 90 years ago. At some point, history becomes history. We can't right every wrong." Grace stood up. "I need to think about this." Victoria rose as well, leaving a business card on the table. "Of course, but don't take too long. The longer that vault remains a secret, the harder it becomes to control what happens when the secret gets out. And it will get out, Miss Carter. It always does. After Victoria left, Grace sat in the gathering darkness, her mind spinning. Everything the lawyer said made terrible sense, but it also felt wrong, like she was being pushed into complicity with crimes committed before she was born. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. We need to talk about the tower. Tonight. Come alone. The old lumber road off Highway 42, 9 p.m. Grace's blood went cold. She texted back, "Who is this?" The response came immediately. "Someone who knows what you found. Someone who'll pay you to keep quiet. Or make you keep quiet. Your choice." Grace's hands shook. She deleted the texts and went next door to get Lily. Mrs. Chen chatted about her garden while Lily gathered her backpack, oblivious to the terror churning in Grace's gut. Back home, Grace triple-checked the locks and closed all the curtains. She made Lily dinner, helped with homework, and tucked her into bed, all while her mind raced with impossible decisions. At 8:45, Grace's phone rang. Marcus Webb, the historian. "Miss Carter, I need to warn you. Someone's been asking questions about you around town. About the tower. About what you might have found. These aren't academics or researchers. These are dangerous people. I got a threatening text," Grace admitted. "They want to meet tonight. Don't go. Whatever they're offering or threatening, don't engage. You need to go to the authorities. Now." The law firm that handled the estate says that'll make things worse. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Victoria Ashford contacted you. How did you?" "That firm has been covering up the Ashworth family's crimes for over a century. They don't work for you, Miss Carter. They work for the secret. For keeping it buried." Grace looked at Lily's bedroom door. "What do I do?" "Document everything. Every piece in that vault. Upload it to the cloud. Send copies to people you trust. Make the information impossible to suppress. Then, contact the FBI's art crime team. They handle cases like this. They can protect you." After they hung up, Grace spent 2 hours uploading every photo from the vault to 3 different cloud storage accounts. She emailed copies to Marcus and to her old high school friend who'd become a lawyer in Boston. She wrote out everything that had happened and saved it as a document. If something happened to her, at least the truth would survive. But even as she worked, doubt gnawed at her. Was she doing the right thing? Victoria was right about one thing. Exposing the vault would destroy any chance of Lily benefiting from the inheritance. It would paint Grace as naive, foolish. People in town already whispered that she was unstable, raising a daughter alone, barely scraping by. This would confirm every cruel assumption they'd made about her. At 10 p.m., there was a knock at the door. Grace's heart hammered. She grabbed her phone, ready to call 911. "Miss Carter." A man's voice, calm but authoritative. "This is Special Agent David Chen with the FBI. Marcus Webb contacted us. We need to talk." Grace peered through the peephole. A man in a dark suit stood on her porch, badge held up to the door. She called Marcus first to confirm, then opened the door with the chain still on. "May I come in?" Agent Chen asked. Grace let him in. He was perhaps 40, with kind eyes and the demeanor of someone who'd seen terrible things but still chose to believe in people. He sat in her kitchen, declining coffee, and pulled out a tablet. "Marcus sent us your photos. If these are authentic, and I have every reason to believe they are, you've discovered one of the largest stolen art caches in American history. We're talking about dozens of unsolved thefts from the 1920s and 30s, families who filed insurance claims and never saw their property again, museums that lost pieces during the Depression. This is massive," Victoria Ashford said, reporting it would complicate everything. Grace said quietly. Agent Chen's jaw tightened. "Victoria Ashford has been obstructing justice for the better part of 3 decades. Her father did it before her. That firm, has protected criminal enterprises for generations. What she told you was partially true. This will be complicated. There will be legal battles, but there's also a right and wrong here. These items were stolen. They need to be returned to their rightful owners or, where that's not possible, given to institutions that will preserve them for the public. And my daughter, she legally inherited this property. She'll be compensated fairly. The government has a process for returning stolen property. In cases where no heirs exist, where items have been abandoned, there are finder's fees, legal settlements. Your daughter won't walk away empty-handed, but she also won't profit directly from criminal activity. Can you live with that? Grace thought of Lily, asleep in the next room. Could she teach her daughter that integrity mattered by choosing to profit from theft? Could she explain someday that they were rich because of crimes committed generations ago? What do I need to do? Grace asked. Let us secure the site. Give us access to document everything. Cooperate fully with the investigation. In return, we protect you and your daughter. This goes public eventually, but on our timeline, not theirs. We control the narrative. Grace nodded slowly. Okay, but I want to go back down there first. One more time. There's something about the final level I didn't explore fully. I need to see it all before it becomes a crime scene. Agent Chen hesitated, then nodded. Tomorrow morning, I'll accompany you. But after that, the site goes into federal custody. That night, Grace barely slept. Every sound made her jump. Every car that passed seemed to slow down outside their duplex. She kept checking on Lily, watching her daughter sleep peacefully, unaware of the storm gathering around them. At dawn, Grace and Agent Chen drove to the tower. He'd brought 2 other agents as backup. They parked at the clearing and approached cautiously. Grace unlocked the door, her hands steadier now that she'd made her decision. Inside, the tower felt different, charged somehow, like it knew its secrets were about to be revealed. They descended through the levels, Grace pointing out the file cabinets, the storage rooms, the living quarters, where Cecilia had catalogued her family's crimes. Agent Chen's team photographed everything, taking notes in quiet voices. In the main vault, one of the agents, a woman named Sarah Martinez, actually gasped when she saw the collection. My God, she whispered. I've worked art crime for 15 years. I've never seen anything like this. They spent an hour cataloging, taking detailed photographs, identifying pieces that Sarah recognized from art history. A Monet, 2 Degas, what appeared to be a Vermeer, though that would need expert verification. Sculptures that belonged in the Louvre, jewels from Russian nobility, manuscripts illuminated by medieval monks. And in the very back, behind the display cases, Grace found what she'd been looking for. Another door. There's more, she said. This door was heavier than the others, reinforced with steel. The final key on Grace's ring fit the lock. It opened with a hiss of air, like a seal breaking. Beyond was a smaller chamber, and this one told the final chapter of the Ashworth story. It was a living space, but not like the quarters above. This was furnished for long-term occupation. A bed with a real mattress, now rotted. A kitchen area with a wood stove. The chimney venting up through hundreds of feet of rock. Shelves of canned goods, expired decades ago. Barrels that had once held water. And sitting at a small table, preserved by the dry air, was a skeleton. Everyone stopped. Agent Chen moved forward slowly, his flashlight illuminating what remained. The skeleton was small, wearing the rotted remains of a suit. Beside it on the table was a revolver, long rusted, and a final letter. Grace approached with trembling legs. Agent Chen handed her latex gloves. She picked up the letter carefully. It was written in shaky handwriting, dated December 1924. To whoever finds this, my name is Richard Ashworth. By now, I suppose I'm long dead, which means you've discovered my collection, my empire, my sin. We fled here, Eleanor, Christopher, and myself, when the authorities closed in. We thought we could wait them out, live here, until they stopped searching. We had supplies for months, maybe years, but Christopher got sick first. Pneumonia, I think. We had no doctor, no medicine. He died in November. Eleanor went mad with grief. She walked up those stairs one night while I slept and never came back. I found out later she'd thrown herself from the tower. So it's just me now. I've been alone for 3 weeks. I could leave, I suppose. Walk out, turn myself in. But what's the point? My family is gone. My empire was built on lies. And I'm too old, too tired to start over. So I'm taking the coward's way out. I'm staying here with my treasures, with the proof of everything I took from others. Maybe someday, someone will find all this and do what I couldn't. Make it right. Return what was stolen. Tell the truth. I'm sorry. I didn't have the courage. Richard Ashworth. Grace set down the letter with shaking hands. The entire Ashworth family had died here, in and around this tower. Cecilia alone had survived. A 14-year-old girl left to guard her family's secrets and corpses. She knew, Grace whispered. Cecilia knew they were down here, and she never told anyone. Agent Chen photographed the scene, careful not to disturb the remains. She was protecting them, even in death. Sarah moved around the chamber, documenting everything. In a corner, she found something else. A ledger, newer than the others, in Cecilia's handwriting. Grace read over her shoulder. It was a detailed accounting of every piece in the collection, updated through the years. But it was the final entry, dated May 2018, that made Grace's throat close. I'm 97 years old today. I've lived my entire life in the shadow of my family's crimes, guarding their secrets, unable to expose them without destroying their memory entirely. But I'm tired of being alone with this burden. I've decided to leave everything to the next generation of my family, to a child young enough to still see the world in terms of right and wrong, not legal and illegal. Maybe she'll have the courage I never did. Maybe she'll do what I couldn't. Bring all of this into the light and let the world judge us. I hope she forgives me for this burden. But I also hope she understands that some secrets are too big to die with one person. They need to be shared, even if it destroys everything. Especially if it destroys everything. She left this for Lily on purpose, Grace said. She wanted it found, wanted it exposed. Agent Chen nodded slowly. She spent 90 years protecting the secret, and then at the end, she chose the truth. They emerged from the tower hours later, Grace's mind reeling. Agent Chen had called in a full forensic team. Within hours, the clearing was full of federal vehicles. Crime scene tape surrounded the tower. News vans appeared by afternoon, though the agents kept them at the perimeter. Grace stood in the clearing, watching strangers cart away pieces of history, and felt oddly empty. This had been Lily's inheritance, her chance at a different life. Now it was evidence in a federal investigation. Miss Carter, Sarah Martinez approached. I wanted you to know. I checked our records. 17 of the pieces in that vault have direct heirs who've been searching for them for decades. 17 families who'll finally have closure. That's because of you. Because you chose to come forward. I didn't have much choice, Grace said quietly. You had every choice. You could have taken Victoria Ashford's deal, sold pieces on the black market, hidden it all again, but you didn't. That matters. That evening, back at the duplex with Lily, Grace tried to explain what was happening. Her daughter listened with wide eyes as Grace talked about the FBI, about stolen art, about doing the right thing even when it cost them. So, we're not rich? Lily asked. No, baby, we're not rich. Lily was quiet for a moment, then said, Good. Grace blinked. Good? Miss Cecilia's journals said she was lonely her whole life because of those secrets. I don't want to be lonely like that. I'd rather be poor with you than rich and sad like she was. Grace pulled her daughter close, tears streaming down her face. When did you get so wise? I'm 8 now, Mama. I know stuff. Grace laughed through her tears. She thought about Cecilia, about Richard, about all the Ashworths who'd been destroyed by greed and secrets. And she thought about Lily, who at 8 years old understood what they'd spent lifetimes missing, that some things mattered more than money. Over the next week, the story exploded. News outlets across the world covered the discovery. Century-old treasure trove found beneath Connecticut Tower. FBI recovers hundreds of millions in stolen art. Child inherits criminal empire. Mother turns it over to authorities. Grace stopped reading the articles after the first day. Some painted her as a hero. Others called her a fool. A few suggested she'd been coerced by the FBI. Everyone had an opinion. Victoria Ashford called 3 times. Grace didn't answer. Marcus Webb stopped by with a box of pastries and congratulations. You did the right thing, he said. Hardest thing, but the right thing. Doesn't feel like it, Grace admitted. Feels like I threw away my daughter's future. You gave her something better than money. You gave her an example. You showed her that integrity matters more than wealth. Tell that to the bill collectors. But Marcus smiled. Actually, I might be able to help with that. The museum world is buzzing about this discovery. Several institutions want to create an exhibition about the Ashworth collection, telling the full story. They need a consultant, someone who knows the tower, the family history. It pays well, and they specifically asked for you. Grace stared at him. Why me? Because you're part of the story now. The woman who chose truth over fortune. That resonates with people. 2 weeks after the FBI secured the vault, Agent Chen returned with news. They'd identified 63 pieces with direct heirs who were still alive or whose estates could be located. 17 more would go to museums as bequests. The remaining items, those with no traceable provenance or abandoned for over a century, would be sold at auction, with proceeds split between the federal government and Grace's family. It won't be $290 million, he said, but it'll be enough to change your life. Enough for your daughter's education. A house. Security. You won't be rich, but you won't struggle anymore. Grace felt something in her chest unclench. Thank you. Thank you. You could have made this impossible. Instead, you made it right. That evening, Grace sat with Lily at their small kitchen table, the tower keys between them. The FBI says, we can keep the tower, Grace said. The structure itself, the land, they've cleared out the vault, but the building is still ours. Lily touched the brass keys gently. What should we do with it? Grace had been thinking about that. I was thinking we could restore it, make it beautiful again, maybe open it as a museum, telling Cecilia's story. Not to glorify what her family did, but to remember what happened when people chose greed over integrity, and what happened when someone finally chose differently. Lily nodded slowly. Miss Cecilia would like that, I think. Having her story told. She spent her whole life keeping secrets, Grace said. Maybe it's time those secrets became lessons instead. A month later, Grace stood in front of the tower with a contractor, discussing restoration plans. The FBI had finished their investigation. The media frenzy had died down. Life was returning to something almost normal, though nothing would ever be quite the same. Her phone buzzed. A text from her new employer at the Hartford Museum. Ashworth exhibition. Confirmed for next summer. Lead consultant. Role confirmed. Looking forward to working with you. Grace smiled. She'd gone from struggling waitress to museum consultant in 6 weeks. All because an 8-year-old inherited a tower full of secrets, and her mother chose to tell the truth. She looked up at the stone structure. It no longer seemed menacing. It seemed sad, a monument to wasted lives and missed chances. But maybe, with time and care, it could become something else. Something that honored Cecilia's final choice, without forgetting her family's crimes. Mama? Lily appeared from behind the tower, holding something. I found this. It was a wildflower, purple and delicate, growing from a crack in the stone foundation. Somehow, despite everything, despite 90 years of secrets and darkness, life had found a way through. Grace took the flower from her daughter. You know what? I think that's a sign. Of what? That even when things seem broken beyond repair, even when the darkness seems to win, there's always a chance for something beautiful to grow. We just have to be brave enough to let the light in. Lily smiled and took her mother's hand. Together they stood before the tower, before the broken stones and the hidden depths, and for the first time, Grace felt hope instead of fear. The secrets were out now. The darkness had been dragged into the light. And though they'd lost a fortune, they'd gained something infinitely more valuable. The knowledge that they'd done the right thing, even when it cost them everything. Because some inheritances aren't meant to be kept. Some secrets aren't meant to stay buried. And sometimes, the greatest treasure isn't what you find, but what you choose to do with it. The tower stood silent behind them, its stones holding memories of all the Ashworths, who'd been destroyed by greed. But it also held something new now. The memory of Grace and Lily, who'd chosen differently, who'd proven that integrity still mattered, that truth still had value. And somewhere in that thought, in that choice, lay the foundation for a different kind of legacy entirely. 6 months had passed since the FBI seized the vault's contents. Winter had given way to spring, and Grace Carter stood in the clearing outside Ashworth Tower, watching contractors work on the stone exterior. The scaffolding climbed 3 stories, and the sound of hammers echoed through the forest like a heartbeat, bringing the old structure back to life. Lily sat on a tree stump nearby, sketchbook open on her lap, drawing the tower as she imagined it would look when finished. She'd grown taller over these months, her face losing some of its baby softness. But her eyes still held that same clarity, that pure sense of right and wrong that had guided them through the darkest moments. "Mama, can we paint the door red?" Lily asked, without looking up from her drawing. "Red for courage, like Miss Cecilia needed." Grace smiled. "Red for courage. I like that." The restoration had been Agent Chen's idea initially. After the investigation concluded, after 63 families had been reunited with their stolen heirlooms, after museums had reclaimed pieces missing for nearly a century, the question remained, what to do with the tower itself? Grace had nearly sold it. The property value was minimal, the maintenance costs would be substantial, and part of her wanted nothing more to do with the Ashworth legacy. But Lily had begged her to keep it. "We can make it mean something good," her daughter had insisted. "We can make it tell the truth." So Grace had agreed. With the settlement money from the few pieces that legally became theirs, the finder's fees for items with no traceable heirs, and the consulting position at the Hartford Museum, they finally had resources. Not wealth, not the fortune they'd briefly glimpsed in that vault, but enough. Enough to restore the tower. Enough to move out of their cramped duplex into a small house near the tower property. Enough to stop living paycheck to paycheck. But more importantly, enough to build something meaningful. The Hartford Museum had partnered with them to create the Ashworth Tower Museum and Education Center. It would tell the full story. The crimes committed in the 1920s and 30s, the families torn apart by theft, Cecilia's lonely vigil, and the ultimate choice to bring everything into the light. Half monument, half warning. A place to remember what happened when greed went unchecked, and what happened when someone finally said enough. "Miss Carter?" A woman's voice pulled Grace from her thoughts. She turned to see Sarah Martinez, the FBI agent who'd been part of the original investigation. She'd become something of a friend over these months, stopping by periodically to check on progress and offer guidance. "Sarah, hi. What brings you out here?" Sarah held up a folder. "Good news. We located another heir. A woman in Boston whose grandmother's jewelry was stolen in 1927. The emerald necklace you found. It was her great-grandmother's wedding gift. She cried when I told her we'd recovered it. Grace's throat tightened. These moments still affected her deeply. That's wonderful. There's more. Sarah opened the folder. We finished the final accounting. After all the returns, all the museum allocations, there are still 12 pieces that legally fall to your daughter's estate. Small items, mostly. Things with questionable provenance or items that were legitimately purchased, mixed in with the stolen goods. But their auction value is estimated at around $750,000. Grace's knees felt weak. She sat down hard on the stump next to Lily. That's more than I expected. Sarah nodded. It's enough to finish the restoration completely and set up an endowment for the museum's operation. You won't have to worry about funding. The tower can be self-sustaining. Lily looked up from her drawing. Does that mean the families got back what was theirs? Most of them, sweetheart, Sarah said gently. Not everything could be traced, and some families are long gone. But we returned everything we could. You helped give a lot of people closure. Good, Lily said simply, and went back to her drawing. Sarah and Grace exchanged a look. That was Lily's way. No need for praise or recognition. Just satisfaction in knowing the right thing had been done. After Sarah left, Grace walked through the tower with the head contractor, a weathered man named Joe Brennan, who'd restored historic buildings across New England. The interior had been gutted and rebuilt to code while preserving as much of the original structure as possible. The ground floor would house the main exhibition space, telling the Ashworth story through photographs, journal entries, and carefully curated artifacts. The second floor would become an education center, with a library focused on art history and ethics. The third floor, the observatory where Cecilia had watched the stars, would be restored to its original state and opened for evening astronomy programs. But it was the basement levels that had required the most delicate handling. The first level down, where Cecilia had kept her records, would remain as she'd left it. The file cabinets, now empty, would stand as testimony to the meticulous cataloging of crimes. The second level, the storage rooms, had been converted into archives where researchers could study the Ashworth family papers under controlled conditions. And the deepest level, the vault where Richard Ashworth had taken his own life, would be sealed. A simple plaque would mark its location, in memory of those whose choices destroyed them, and in honor of those who chose differently. It's coming together, Joe said, running his hand along the restored stonework. This place has good bones. It deserves to stand for another century. Grace nodded. Cecilia would be glad, I think, that it's finally telling the truth. The weeks blurred together as the restoration progressed. Grace threw herself into the museum planning, working with curators from Hartford to design exhibitions that would be both educational and impactful. She interviewed descendants of theft victims, recorded their stories, and wove them into the narrative. But it was Lily who became the project's heart. The little girl who'd inherited a tower full of secrets had become its most passionate advocate. She insisted on a children's section in the museum, a place where kids could learn about making ethical choices through interactive exhibits. She wanted art classes held in the tower, giving local children access to something beautiful. She even designed a logo, a tower with light streaming from its windows, darkness being pushed away. It's about hope, Lily explained to the graphic designer they'd hired, about how one person choosing to be brave can change everything. The designer, a young woman named Maya, looked at Grace with tears in her eyes. Your daughter is remarkable. Grace knew. She'd always known Lily was special, but watching her daughter navigate this complex moral landscape with such clarity, such compassion, made Grace's heart swell with pride. As spring turned to summer, word spread through Millbrook about the tower's transformation. The same people who'd mocked Grace and Lily in the grocery store, who'd whispered that they were crazy or attention-seeking, now watched with grudging interest. Janet Miller from the market cornered Grace one afternoon at the post office. "So, this museum thing is really happening. Grand opening is scheduled for September 1st, Grace said coolly. Janet shifted uncomfortably. "Listen, I may have been hasty in my judgment about you and Lily. What you're doing with the tower, turning down all that money to do the right thing, well, it's admirable." Grace wanted to say it was too little too late. She wanted to remind Janet of every cruel word, every dismissive look. But Lily's voice echoed in her head. "Being mean back doesn't make the first mean go away, Mama. It just makes more mean." "Thank you," Grace said simply. "We're having a preview day for locals 2 weeks before the public opening. You're welcome to come." Janet nodded, something like shame crossing her face, and left. That evening, Grace sat with Lily on their new house's porch, watching fireflies dance in the twilight. The house wasn't large, just a modest 3-bedroom on 2 acres adjacent to the tower property, but it was theirs, bought outright with money they'd earned, through honest work. "Mama," Lily asked, "do you ever wish we'd kept the treasure?" Grace considered the question seriously. "Sometimes," she admitted, "when I see other families taking vacations or buying new cars. But then I remember Miss Cecilia spending 90 years alone with all that wealth and never once being truly happy. And I think we got the better deal." "We got each other," Lily said. "We got each other," Grace agreed. "And we got to help families get back what was taken from them. That's worth more than any amount of money." Lily was quiet for a moment, then said, "I got a letter today, from the lady in Boston, the one whose necklace we found." Grace turned to her daughter. "What did she say?" She said, "Thank you." She said her grandmother told stories about that necklace her whole life, about how beautiful it was, and how heartbroken she'd been when it was stolen. She said, finding it was like getting a piece of her grandmother back. She sent a picture of her wearing it. Lily pulled a photograph from her pocket. In it, an elderly woman wore an emerald necklace, tears streaming down her face, smiling wider than seemed possible. "She looks happy," Lily said softly. Grace wrapped her arm around her daughter. "That's what doing the right thing looks like, baby. It doesn't always make you rich, but it makes you rich in ways that matter more." As summer progressed, Millbrook began to change. The news coverage of the tower's restoration had been extensive. National outlets had covered the story. Mother and daughter choose integrity over fortune. Connecticut Tower, transformed from criminal cache to educational monument. Child's moral compass guides. Historic restoration. Tourism boards took notice. The State Historical Society designated the tower a landmark. Travel blogs listed it as an upcoming must-see destination. And Millbrook, a town that had been slowly dying for decades, suddenly had something it hadn't had in years: hope. Local businesses started renovating their storefronts. A young couple opened a bed and breakfast. The diner where Grace used to work expanded its hours and menu. Even the old movie theater, closed since 2008, showed signs of potential reopening. Mayor Richard Thompson, who'd largely ignored Grace during the investigation, now called her for photo opportunities and town meetings. Grace declined most of them, but she did agree to speak at the town council about the tower's economic impact. "We project 50,000 visitors in the first year," she told the assembled council and residents. "That's 50,000 people who'll eat in our restaurants, shop in our stores, maybe stay overnight in our hotels. But more importantly, it's 50,000 people who learn about the cost of greed and the value of integrity. Millbrook won't just be a tourist destination. We'll be a place that stands for something." The crowd applauded, but it was Lily's voice that carried from the back of the room. "We'll be a place that tells the truth." People turned to look at the 8-year-old standing on a chair so she could see. Some smiled. A few wiped their eyes. Janet Miller, sitting in the 3rd row, applauded louder than anyone. After the meeting, Mrs. Patterson, Lily's teacher, approached Grace. "I owe you an apology. When Lily first told us about inheriting a tower, I thought she was making up stories. I should have known better. She's always been honest to a fault." Grace smiled. "She still is. It's one of her best qualities. She's inspired the whole class. Half the students have written essays about ethical decision-making. She's changed the way they think about right and wrong." Grace looked across the room at Lily, who was showing Mayor Thompson her sketch of the completed tower. Her daughter had changed more than just her classmates. She'd changed an entire town's trajectory. The week before the grand opening, the Hartford Museum sent their senior curator, Dr. Elizabeth Warren, to do a final walkthrough. Grace and Lily gave her a complete tour, starting at the top of the tower and working their way down. Dr. Warren was impressed by everything, but it was the children's section that made her stop and take notes. "This is brilliant," she said. "Interactive exhibits about making hard choices, about the difference between legal and ethical, about how one person can make a difference. This isn't just a museum, it's a tool for building better humans." "That was Lily's idea," Grace said. "She wanted kids to understand that they have power, that their choices matter." Dr. Warren knelt to Lily's eye level. "You've created something remarkable here. I've been in this profession for 30 years, and I've never seen a museum with such a clear moral purpose. You should be very proud." Lily ducked her head shyly. "I just wanted Miss Cecilia's story to help people instead of hurt them." On September 1st, 2025, the Ashworth Tower Museum and Education Center officially opened its doors. The clearing that had once been overgrown and forgotten now held a proper parking lot, landscaped grounds, and a stone pathway leading to the Partha Tower's newly painted red door. Hundreds of people lined up for the opening. Locals, tourists, journalists, representatives from the FBI and various museums. Grace stood at the entrance in a simple dress, her hand clasped in Lily's. Her daughter wore a purple dress she'd picked out herself, and a crown of wildflowers in her hair. "You ready?" Grace asked. Lily squeezed her hand. "I'm ready, Mama." They cut the ribbon together, red fabric falling away, as the crowd applauded. Then Grace stepped aside, letting Lily give the first tour. "Welcome to Ashworth Tower," Lily began, her voice small but clear. "This is a story about choices. About how my great-great-great-aunt Cecilia spent her whole life protecting her family's secrets, and how she finally decided that the truth was more important than the secret. It's about how my mama chose to do the right thing even when it was hard. And it's about how all of us get to choose, every single day, what kind of people we want to be." Grace watched her daughter lead the crowd through the exhibitions, explaining complex ethical questions in language an 8-year-old could understand. But that resonated with adults too. She saw people nodding, wiping their eyes, taking photos not just of artifacts, but of Lily herself, this little girl who'd become the face of integrity. Marcus Webb found Grace standing alone near the fireplace, where she'd first opened Cecilia's journal. "You did it," he said. "You actually did it." "Lily did it," Grace corrected. "I just followed her lead." That's parenting in a nutshell, isn't it? Knowing when to follow your children's better angels. Over the next few months, the museum exceeded every projection. Visitor numbers climbed steadily. Schools scheduled field trips. The story was featured on national news programs and in major publications. But it wasn't the fame that mattered to Grace. It was the letters. They came from everywhere. Families who'd visited, teachers who'd brought their classes, children who'd been inspired by Lily's story. One letter, from a teenager in California, said, "I found a wallet with $300 in it last week. Before hearing about Lily, I might have kept it, but I thought about her choosing to give up millions to do the right thing, so I returned the wallet. The owner cried and thanked me. I felt like I'd done something important. Thank you for showing me that integrity isn't old-fashioned. It's necessary. Grace framed that letter and hung it in the museum's office. It represented everything they'd hoped to accomplish. By Christmas, Millbrook was unrecognizable. The dying town had become a thriving community. Property values had increased. New businesses had opened. The school system, which had been facing budget cuts, received an influx of funding from increased tax revenue. Even the old movie theater reopened, showing classic films and hosting community events. And at the center of it all stood Ashworth Tower, a monument, the idea that truth mattered, that integrity had value, that one person choosing right over easy could change everything. On Christmas Eve, Grace and Lily returned to the tower after hours. The museum was closed, the lights dimmed. They descended to the first basement level, where Cecilia's desk still stood as she'd left it. Lily placed a small bouquet of wildflowers on the desk. "Thank you, Miss Cecilia," she whispered, "for being brave enough to give us the choice." Grace added her own flowers, beside Lily's. "Thank you for believing someone would choose differently." They stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by the history of choices made and unmade, of lives lived and wasted, of secrets kept and finally revealed. Then Lily took her mother's hand. "Can I tell you something, Mama?" "Always. I'm glad we're not rich. I'm glad we chose the way we did. Because now, when people look at me, they don't see someone who got lucky. They see someone who did right. And that feels better than any treasure." Grace knelt down and pulled her daughter close. "When did you get so wise?" "I learned from you," Lily said simply. "You showed me that being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about being scared and doing the right thing anyway." That night, as they drove home through Millbrook's twinkling Christmas lights, past businesses thriving and families laughing, past the community that had been reborn through their choice, Grace felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. Not the peace of financial security, though they had that now. Not the peace of public acclaim, though that had come too. But the peace of knowing, bone deep, that they'd done the right thing, that they'd honored Cecilia's final wish, that they'd chosen truth over treasure, integrity over wealth, and in doing so, had built something more valuable than any vault could hold. The following spring, on Lily's 9th birthday, the museum hosted a special ceremony. Descendants of 17 families, whose property had been recovered, gathered to thank Grace and Lily personally. They brought photos, stories, and gratitude that money couldn't buy. The woman from Boston, now wearing her great-grandmother's emerald necklace, spoke for the group. "For nearly a century, our families lived with the pain of theft, with the violation of having treasured possessions stolen. We'd given up hope of ever seeing them again. But because one little girl inherited a tower, and because she and her mother chose to do the right thing, we have our family legacies back. You didn't just return property. You returned pieces of our history, our identity, our hearts." Lily stood before them, overwhelmed but smiling. "I'm just glad I could help. Miss Cecilia carried this burden alone for so long. It was too heavy for one person. I'm happy we could all carry it together and make it lighter." The ceremony ended with the unveiling of a plaque outside the tower, in honor of Lily Carter, who, at 8 years old, showed us that the smallest voices can carry the greatest truth, and that doing the right thing is always worth more than doing the easy thing. Lily stared at the plaque, then looked at her mother with tears in her eyes. "Do I deserve this?" Grace knelt beside her. "Baby, you deserve this, and so much more. You changed people's lives. You changed this whole town. You proved that age doesn't matter when it comes to having the courage to do right." As the months turned into years, the museum continued to thrive. Lily grew from a child into a young woman, but she never lost that core of integrity that had guided her from the beginning. She worked at the museum through her teenage years, leading tours, teaching ethics workshops, inspiring new generations of visitors. Grace watched her daughter bloom, watched her become exactly the kind of person the world needed. Someone who understood that wealth without ethics was poverty of the worst kind, that treasure without truth was just weight, dragging you down. On the 10th anniversary of the museum's opening, they stood together in the clearing, looking at the tower that had started it all. It had been restored to beauty, its stones cleaned, its windows gleaming, its red door bright as courage itself. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd chosen differently?" Grace asked. Lily, now 18 and preparing for college, considered the question. "Sometimes. But then I think about all the families who got their treasures back. I think about this town that came back to life. I think about the thousands of kids who visited and learned that they have the power to choose integrity. And I know we chose right. Even though we're not millionaires." Lily laughed. "Mama, we're richer than any millionaire. We're rich in ways that actually matter. We have each other. We have community. We have the knowledge that we made a difference. That's the kind of wealth that lasts." Grace pulled her daughter close. "When did you stop being my little girl and become so wise?" "I'm still your little girl," Lily said. "Just a bigger version. The version you helped me become. Anyone can choose to do the right thing, if they're brave enough to let go of what they think they want and hold tight to what they know is right." As the sun set over Millbrook that evening, Grace Carter stood on the porch of their modest house, watching the tower rise against the darkening sky. She thought about Cecilia, about Richard, about all the Ashworths who'd been destroyed by choosing greed over integrity. And she thought about Lily, the little girl who'd inherited their tower and their choice, and who'd proven that sometimes the smallest person in the room carries the biggest truth, that sometimes letting go of fortune means finding something infinitely more valuable, and that sometimes the greatest treasure isn't what you keep, but what you give away. The tower stood tall in the distance, its windows glowing warm in the twilight. Inside, history lived and breathed and taught. Inside, truth had replaced secrets. Inside, light had defeated darkness. Because 10 years ago, an 8-year-old girl had inherited a crumbling fairytale tower. The spiral stairs had led her down to $290 million in stolen treasure. And she'd looked at all that wealth, all that possibility, and said the 3 words that changed everything. Let's do right. Not, let's get rich. Not, let's keep it. Just, let's do right. And in those 3 words, in that simple, pure-hearted choice, Lily Carter had proven something the world desperately needed to remember. That integrity isn't just important, it's everything. That doing the right thing, even when it costs you everything, is never the wrong choice. That sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is tell the truth, even when the lie would be so much easier. The mechanic's daughter had become a teacher. The struggling single mother had become a curator. The dying town had become a destination. The crumbling tower had become a beacon. All because a little girl knew, bone deep and soul certain, that some things matter more than money, that some treasures are meant to be shared, that some secrets are too heavy to keep, and that bringing them into the light, no matter how much it costs, is always, always worth it. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful true stories are waiting for you. Click now to continue the journey with us. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe that doing the right thing is always worth more than doing the easy thing.